The projection screen bore a title in crisp corporate font: Early Detection Neural Network, a breakthrough in ovarian cancer screening. Beneath it, a single name: Jeffrey Albright.
That's my algorithm. Every line of code, mine. 9 years of my life. And he's standing there like he discovered fire.
Our team's neural network achieved a 94% sensitivity rate in detecting early-stage ovarian cancer. This is my proudest professional achievement.
Susan's fingers curled against her laptop, knuckles whitening. Her chest burned, but no sound escaped.
And now, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
A few board members nodded approvingly. One older man leaned forward, already beginning to clap before stopping himself.
Not a single citation, not one acknowledgement. This is not his work.
If I speak now, I'll look bitter. If I stay silent, I'll die inside.
Then, from the head of the table, Margaret Chen raised her hand. Her expression was unreadable.
Mr. Albright, a question.
9 years earlier, Susan buried her mother on a rain-soaked Tuesday. Ovarian cancer had swept through Helen Weller in 6 months, silent and merciless. A week later, Susan returned to her laboratory, opened a new file, and named it Project Artemis, the algorithm that would become her lifeline. For the next 3 years, she worked alone. Nights bled into mornings, code stacked upon code, each line a refusal to let her mother's death be meaningless.
Every false positive is a woman terrified. Every false negative is a funeral. I won't tolerate either.
By year 5, she had a prototype. Crude, fragile, but it detected patterns in blood markers that no human eye could see. A framed photo of her mother sat on her desk. She looked at it each time she wanted to quit.
This isn't about a promotion. It's about the morning we found her collapsed. That look in her eyes, she knew.
Year 7 brought a breakthrough. The algorithm hit 90% accuracy. Susan cried in the server room. Alone, she refined it relentlessly. 9 years, over 3,000 nights. One algorithm that could rewrite early cancer detection. And 18 months ago, she had let Jeffrey Albright into her office to help.
Dr. Weller? Jeffrey Albright. I've been following your work for years. The Artemis Project is legendary. I'd be honored just to sit in.
Polished. Too polished. But the VP recommended him. Maybe another set of eyes wouldn't hurt.
Your formatting is solid, but the board presentations need polish. Let me help. I can clean up the slides, make them sing. No credit needed.
Susan hesitated. Her finger hovered over the mouse before she granted Red access to the shared drive. A small concession, she told herself. Jeffrey settled into a corner desk. Within weeks, he was copying files, staying late, asking questions that probed the code's deepest architecture.
He's enthusiastic. That's good. The project deserves excitement. But why does he want the raw training data?
For context, to build the narrative, you don't want to confuse the board with too much detail. Trust me.
She checked the access logs once. Nothing flagged. Just a junior analyst doing his job, she thought. She closed the browser and moved on.
She has no idea. 9 years of work, and she's handing me the keys to a kingdom she doesn't know I'm about to claim.
Susan handed him the formatting macros. A month later, he presented her slides, subtly rebranded, at a departmental review. He used the word "our."
Yes, Ms. Chen. I'd be happy to answer.
Actually, I'll let others go first. I'm sure there will be plenty to discuss.
A board member in a pearl necklace leaned forward. "Walk us through the methodology," she said.
We used a progressive neural network with unsupervised feature extraction, building on years of in-house data curation.
Those were my words. Exactly my words from the 2017 technical brief. He memorized them.
Another director asked about the clinical validation.
The validation protocols were rigorous. We achieved 93% sensitivity on blinded samples. The credit goes to meticulous dataset curation.
Meticulous. That was my word. I used it in every grant proposal. He's reading from my script.
Margaret watched from the end of the table, her fingers lightly tapping, her questions still coiled. The questions continued, each one tightening the noose Jeffrey didn't know was around his neck. 2 months before the board meeting, Susan opened the shared drive logs and felt her stomach drop.
Jeffrey accessed the core algorithm files twice daily for a month. That's not formatting help.
In a team meeting, Jeffrey started using the phrase "our algorithm," and nobody corrected him.
Hour? He joined 18 months ago. I've poured 9 years into this.
She voiced her concern to a senior colleague, who waved a hand and told her Jeffrey was just ambitious. The unease lingered, a cold knot in her chest. That night she recalled a conversation from 3 years earlier.
Susan, in this industry, people will try to claim your work. Protect every draft. I recommend an automatic BCC to a secure archive.
Susan had set it up then, a quiet rule she never thought she'd need. The emails went silently to Margaret's folder. Now, 2 months before the presentation, she told herself it was paranoia and closed the logs. That silence would cost her everything, and yet it would also save her. The final routine question died in the air. Margaret Chen leaned forward, her hand still raised, her gaze fixed on Jeffrey.
Mr. Albright, you've detailed the current iteration, but I'd like you to walk us through the original 2016 prototype.
The 2016 prototype? Well, the early work was exploratory. We iterated quickly.
His hand twitched on the clicker. Behind him, the screen still declared "our breakthrough."
He doesn't know. He never read the prototype papers. He only copied the final version.
You told the board you built this from the ground up? Surely you can discuss the initial model.
The initial architecture was a simple neural net. It evolved significantly over the years.
Margaret gave no reaction. She opened her silver laptop, her fingers tapping with deliberate slowness.
She's going to do something. I think she's going to save me.
The room waited. Jeffrey's mask had cracked, and every board member saw it. 3 years earlier, in Margaret's office, the air had been thick with unspoken warnings. Margaret had closed the door and turned to Susan with an intensity Susan rarely saw.
Susan, you're not just building an algorithm, you're building a target. I've seen brilliant women lose everything because they trusted the wrong person.
Lose everything? I hadn't considered that. The science was all that mattered. But Margaret's eyes held a history I didn't know.
I want you to set up an Outlook rule. Every time you send a draft related to Project Artemis, it automatically BCCs a secure archive that only I can access. No exceptions.
An archive? That seems extreme. It's just research.
Extreme is what you'll wish for when someone takes credit. Do it. I'll walk you through it now.
Susan, still uncertain, opened her laptop at Margaret's desk. Together they configured the rule. Any email with Artemis in the subject would blind copy to a folder labeled Susan, IP audit log. Margaret watched from behind Susan's chair, her hand resting lightly on the backrest, a faint, knowing smile on her lips.
This will probably just gather dust. But if it makes Margaret feel better, fine.
From that day, every milestone draft, every code update, every grant submission flowed silently into the digital vault. Susan rarely thought about it, but the rule never stopped. Margaret pressed a key, and her laptop screen replaced the presentation on the wall. A folder appeared, titled Susan, IP Audit Log. Inside, hundreds of emails, time-stamped, meticulously dated.
August 14th, 2016. Artemis prototype, initial neural net architecture. Margaret read aloud, her voice calm.
That's my naming convention. I've always used structured file names.
No, that's my subject line. I wrote that at 2 a.m. while my mother's memory kept me awake.
A board member leaned toward the screen. The title signature belonged to Susan Weller, not Jeffrey Albright.
March 3, 2017. Dataset curation protocol, refined feature selection. Another subject line, another timestamp.
Jeffrey's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth, but no words came.
It's the archive. The rule I set up with Margaret. She kept every one.
The boardroom fell into stunned silence. Both Susan and Jeffrey stared at the screen, but only one of them was its true author. Margaret scrolled down. A third email highlighted. January 9th, 2018, cross-validation breakthrough, 91% sensitivity.
January 9th, 2018. The date of our first major validation milestone.
I sent that draft at 4 a.m. from the hospital cafeteria. The night my mother's scan came back clean, but I couldn't stop working.
A board member leaned toward a colleague. Who is Susan Weller? The name that should have been on every slide.
I collaborated with Susan. This is a misunderstanding.
These are blind copies, Mr. Albright. She never sent them to you.
The board exchanged glances. Years of presentations, and they had never seen Susan's name on a slide.
She didn't just keep the emails. She waited for this moment.
The projector still showed the folder, now with over 300 entries, each a testament to Susan's silent labor. The room's silence was no longer stunned. It was accusatory. Every face turned toward Jeffrey Albright.
This is a setup. Someone planted those files. I've been working on this project for years.
No one planted 300 emails over 9 years, Mr. Albright.
Susan Weller rose from her chair. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but carried.
Every subject line, every timestamp, every draft. That's not a setup. That's a chronicle of my life for the last 9 years. The night my mother died, I was editing the ensemble method. I sent the draft at 3:12 a.m. It's in that folder.
This is absurd. I'm calling my lawyer.
Margaret pressed a button on the table. The door opened, and 2 security officers stepped in. They approached Jeffrey. He grabbed his laptop, but one officer took it from him. Jeffrey's face lost all color. As they led him out, Susan watched, her hands shaking but her spine straight. She walked to the front of the room, past the podium, and stood beside Margaret. The board waited.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm correcting a long-standing error. Dr. Susan Weller is the sole creator of Project Artemis. Effective immediately, she is promoted to Vice President of Translational Research with a retroactive royalty stake in the algorithm.
The board burst into applause, the sound sharp and sudden after the silence. Susan blinked, her composure cracking for the first time.
VP royalties. This was never about the money, but it's about recognition, finally.
Susan looked at Margaret, questions burning. How had she known? The rule, the timing, it was too precise.
Margaret, the folder, the BCC rule, did you know this would happen?
We can talk after. I'll tell you what you need to know.
The board members rose one by one, offering handshakes. But Susan's focus remained on the woman who had quietly guarded her work.
She set me up to win. But why? What did she see that I didn't?
The meeting adjourned, but the real revelation was still to come in a quieter space.
The meeting is over, but I suspect your questions are just beginning. Come, walk with me.
They moved down the corridor, footsteps muffled on thick carpet. Susan's heart still pounded from the confrontation.
The BCC rule. You didn't just suggest it. You built it, didn't you? The archive was yours, and you embedded that rule into my account yourself.
Yes, I configured it that day in my office. I've been watching over your work ever since, waiting for someone like Jeffrey.
But why? Back then I was just a researcher. You hardly knew me. What made you so certain I'd need saving?
Because I've lived it. 30 years ago, my own algorithm was stolen by a colleague with a charming smile. I swore I'd never let it happen again.
They reached the elevator bank. Margaret pressed the call button, her hand steady while Susan's trembled with a decade of released tension. The doors slid open. They stepped into the quiet, mirrored elevator The world outside suddenly cut away.
Then tell me the whole story, Margaret. Not just the rule, the reason you built it for me.
The elevator began its ascent. Margaret looked at Susan, her expression softening for the first time. The doors were closed. It was time.
30 years ago, I developed a neural network for early breast cancer detection. A senior colleague took the code, the paper, the credit. I was left with nothing. I rebuilt my career from scratch, but I vowed never to let the same theft happen to any promising researcher on my watch, especially a woman.
But why me? There were other researchers.
When Jeffrey joined, I had him reviewed. Quietly, at his last company, he'd claimed a senior researcher's work as his own. That researcher is still fighting him.
You knew he was a thief before he even touched my files?
I suspected. But I needed irrefutable proof. The BCC rule was the trap. I built it into your account, but I hoped never to use it. Every email you sent was a time-stamped testament. I knew this day was coming, Susan. So I waited.
You gambled 9 years of my work on a rule, on a hunch because of something that happened to you decades ago.
Not a hunch. A certainty. Men like Jeffrey repeat their crimes. I only had to be patient and let him hang himself with your words.
The elevator chimed. The doors opened onto the executive floor, but Susan didn't move. The full weight of Margaret's sacrifice settled on her, and for the first time, she understood what it meant to be protected. Margaret gave Susan's shoulder a final squeeze and disappeared down the executive corridor. Susan was alone with the truth. She descended the stairs to the research floor. Colleagues halted mid-sentence as she passed. Some whispered congratulations, others simply stared. The story of the boardroom had already raced through the company servers. At her old lab, she pushed open the door. The room was as she'd left it, a time capsule of the woman who'd trusted Jeffrey.
I built it all here. The code, the hope, the grief, and he almost took it.
Her mother's framed photo sat on the corner of the desk, dust faintly gathered on the glass. She picked it up, pressing her thumb to the image. Then she set down her bag and opened her laptop on that same desk. Her email opened, contacts list displayed.
Jeffrey Albright. The name that helped me. The name that lied. I'm removing it from my life.
She selected the contact and pressed delete. No fanfare, just the quiet click of a key. Photo in hand, she walked out and took the elevator to the executive floor, where her new office awaited. The new office was sunlit and silent. A desk of dark wood, a window overlooking the city, a nameplate already waiting. She approached the desk. The brass plate read, Susan Weller, VP Translational Research. Not a loan, not a placeholder. Hers. She set her mother's photo beside the nameplate, aligning it just so.
She should have seen this, but I'm here now.
A soft knock. Margaret stood in the doorway, a folder in hand.
This one is legal. The royalty agreement, 10% of all future licensing. Non-negotiable.
Susan opened the folder. A gold pen sat clipped to the page. She lifted it.
A signature I should have signed years ago, but better late than never.
Welcome to the executive floor, Dr. Weller. You earned this. Every digit.
Margaret withdrew. Susan sat alone with the nameplate, the photo, and a future she'd built through thousands of nights. 3 days later, Susan stood at an atrium podium before the entire R&D division, 70 faces turned up from benches and monitors.
You all know what happened. I won't rehash it. But I will tell you this. Every email, every timestamp, every draft is a shield. Document your work. BCC a secure archive. Make your process so visible that no one can steal it without exposing themselves. I trusted the wrong person, but a woman named Margaret Chen trusted me enough to plan for that betrayal. Now I'm asking you to plan for yours.
A junior researcher began clapping. Others joined, the sound swelling until the atrium shook with it. At the back of the atrium, Margaret stood by a glass wall, unnoticed by most. She nodded once, then slipped away.
Project Artemis was built on grief, but its future will be built on integrity, and I will hold that line.
The applause crested. Susan stepped down, colleagues pressing forward with handshakes and quiet thanks.
She said, built on grief. I never said that out loud before. Maybe it was time.
That evening, a company-wide memo went out. IP protection protocol standardized, named the Chen Rule. Margaret never commented. 2 days after the speech, Margaret found Susan in the executive cafeteria, a corner table, 2 coffees, no interruptions.
You asked why you. I told you the logic, but not the whole truth. The man who stole my work was my fiancé. I trusted him with everything.
Susan set her cup down, the full weight of that betrayal visible in Margaret's steady voice.
You built the rule out of that pain to protect me from the same kind of betrayal.
Yes. When I saw Jeffrey, I recognized the pattern. The charm, the flattery, the slow incursion. I couldn't let it happen again.
Thank you, Margaret. For the rule, for the weight, for everything. You saved more than my career. You saved my belief in justice.
I'd do it again. And now, you'll do it for someone else. That's the legacy.
They stayed another hour, talking about science, loss, and the women they would never let the world forget.
I promise you, Margaret. I'll be the shield now. For every researcher who works alone at night, I'll make sure their work is protected.
Margaret smiled, the first unreserved smile Susan had seen on her. The Chen Rule had become something more, a chain of protection stretching backward and forward. 6 months later, the Artemis algorithm received FDA clearance. Susan watched the announcement from her office, her mother's photo beside the screen. The first hospital pilot launched at a community clinic. Susan walked the corridors in a white coat, a tablet in hand, reviewing real-time results. A doctor stopped her. "We flagged a stage 1 case yesterday. The patient had no symptoms. Your algorithm caught it." Susan's throat tightened. A man who had lost his wife to ovarian cancer funded a plaque in the clinic's lobby, the Helen Weller Early Detection Program.
She never saw this, but she's in every positive result. Every woman who got more time because of this.
That evening, a letter arrived on her desk, handwritten, from a woman named Claire. "Because of you, I'm still here. My daughter still has a mother."
That's why I did it. Not for the credit. For the mornings someone else's mother doesn't collapse.
She placed the letter next to her mother's photograph. 2 women, 2 eras, connected by an algorithm born from grief and protected by a rule. News of the algorithm's success spread. Offers for licensing poured in. Susan delegated the business calls to her team and returned to the lab. The royalty checks would come, but the real payout was the quiet knowledge that her work had begun to outlive her pain. The boardroom where Jeffrey had lied stood empty now, chairs pushed back, the screen dark. Within weeks, Jeffrey's name had been quietly removed from company records and every industry reference he'd ever claimed. Susan read a news item one morning. A patent dispute had surfaced against Jeffrey from his previous company. The article called him a serial filer.
He'll never work in this field again. That's not vengeance. That's just the consequence.
Margaret appointed Susan to chair the newly formed Intellectual Property Ethics Committee, tasked with creating safeguards against internal theft.
We're building something permanent. No more trust alone, verified documentation for every researcher.
Within 3 months, the company adopted a mandatory IP logging protocol, informally called the Chen-Weller Protocol. Margaret watched from a distance, never inserting herself, but always present when Susan glanced toward the executive floor.
The algorithm heals, the protocol protects. That's the legacy of Artemis. That's enough.
The empty boardroom stayed empty for a week before being repurposed. The theft had been scrubbed, but the lessons were now etched in company policy. 1 year after FDA clearance, a medical conference stage lit up with her name. Susan Weller stepped forward to accept the Innovator of the Year award.
This algorithm was built for one woman, but it belongs to everyone who worked silently, protected their drafts, and refused to let theft define their story.
In the third row, Margaret Chen clapped, her hands steady, her eyes glistening but no tears falling. After the ceremony, Margaret found her backstage and pressed a small velvet box into Susan's hands.
A small token. Pearls for the woman who turned grief into a shield.
Inside lay a pearl bracelet, each gem luminous. A small note read, "For Helen and for you."
My mother's name in pearls. She's still with me. Thank you, Margaret, for everything. I'll wear it always.
They stood together in the wings, the applause from the hall still rolling, and for a moment neither spoke. Susan looked down at the bracelet, then up at Margaret. The story was complete, but the chain of protection would continue. Susan returned to her office as the city lights began to flicker on outside. The pearl bracelet caught the last gold of the sunset. She sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and found an email draft waiting. Project Artemis, Phase 3 expansion.
A global screening network. If we can catch it early in every woman, we can rewrite the mortality curve.
She typed with a lightness she had not felt in years. The words arrived without fear. Before sending, she glimpsed the CC field. The rule was still active, BCC to Margaret Chen.
10 years of this rule. And it still works. Some things don't need to change.
She pressed send. The email vanished, its silent copy filing into Margaret's archive.
Margaret will see it, and she'll know it's protected. That's enough.
She leaned back, the bracelet cool against her wrist, and watched the city lights multiply. The algorithm lived, the protection held, and Susan Weller was exactly where she was meant to be. A soft knock on the doorframe. A young researcher with curly hair and glasses stood in the doorway, holding a folder.
Dr. Weller, I'm Maya. I've been working on a pediatric application of the algorithm. I'd like your guidance.
Come in, Maya. Tell me everything. That's exactly the kind of expansion this work deserves.
As Maya spoke, Susan turned to her laptop and opened the Outlook rule settings. She added Maya's name to the BCC field beside Margaret's.
Every idea you send will be time-stamped and protected. This rule is your shield, Maya. Use it.
Like the Chen Weller protocol. I've read all about it.
Susan glanced at her mother's photo. The pearl bracelet glowed softly in the monitor's light.
Then let's get started. I'll walk you through the protection setup and we'll refine your module.
The office glowed with evening light, the city sprawling beyond the window. In the quiet, the chain of protection held, invisible but unbreakable. And somewhere, Margaret Chen opened her laptop and saw the archive welcoming another woman's work.